In the 1980s, Rayful Edmund wasn't just a drug dealer. He was the king of Washington, D.C.'s streets. While most teenagers worried about school, he was building a multi-million-dollar empire, flooding the city with drugs and living like a celebrity. His name carried power, fear, and respect. But as fast as he rose, his empire crumbled. How did one young man take over a city, and what led to his downfall? Rayful Edmund is one of the most notorious drug lords in United States history. When you calculate the numbers every year, around 300,000 pounds of cocaine flood into the United States. Rayful Edmund, once labeled by the U.S. Attorney's Office as the man responsible for bringing a ton of cocaine into Washington, D.C. annually, played a central role in what many believe was a deliberate plan to destroy the African American community. They were killing black youth at 13, 14, and 15 years old. The bodies just weren't being buried until they were 30, 35. In D.C., pure cocaine became the drug of choice. Rayful Edmund controlled the supply, moving between 500 and 1,000 kilos into the city at a time. His family business moved tons of cocaine, and the demand was insatiable. The streets were flooded. People would sell their homes, their belongings, and even betray their loved ones for just one more hit. The product was so pure that it couldn't all be consumed at once. Users would take a hit and be forced to stop. Rayful ran his operation like a Fortune 500 company. He was methodical, structuring his drug empire with 8-hour shifts, supervisors, and salaries. He had 3 shifts, morning, afternoon, and overnight, each controlled by a lieutenant. Some workers hustled for multiple shifts to earn more, selling up to 10 kilos a day. Edmund's leadership transformed the trade into an industrial-scale operation. Every Sunday night, his crew would gather, count the money, and distribute paychecks, $1,000 per person, lining up 40 to 50 people at a time. The empire he built illegally showcased the intelligence and business acumen he could have applied in a legitimate career. Even in high school, Edmund stood out for his intelligence. He was an A and B student, excelling in reading, math, and logical thinking. He had an exceptional ability to listen, pay attention to detail, and absorb the lessons of those who came before him. He could have thrived at Harvard, Yale, or any major corporation, but instead, he turned his intellect into building a criminal empire unlike anything Washington, D.C. had ever seen. At the height of his reign, Rayful's cocaine connection to Los Angeles solidified his power. He formed ties with West Coast suppliers, flooding D.C. with product. He was distributing 50 to 100 kilos at a time, making millions in a business that moved faster than law enforcement could contain. His influence was so vast that even seasoned kingpins acknowledged his dominance. However, power came at a cost. The violence surrounding Edmund's operation escalated. Young men idolized him, willing to kill to prove their loyalty. Even when Edmund himself didn't want bloodshed, his crew acted on their own, turning D.C. into a war zone. The media fueled the hysteria, branding Washington a city under siege. Eventually, the government took notice. Law enforcement built a case against Edmund, intercepting his calls and tracking his every move. By April 15, 1989, the feds made their move. It was one of the biggest drug busts in U.S. history, with law enforcement seizing thousands of pounds of cocaine. The case drew national attention. News stations interrupted programming for breaking coverage, treating it like a high-profile political scandal. Edmund's trial was unlike any other. The jury sat behind bulletproof glass, their identities hidden for their protection. The presiding judge made it clear he had personal stakes in the case, stating his own son had died of a crack overdose. From that moment, it was obvious. The system had already decided Edmund's fate. Rayful Edmund was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But his story remains a symbol of a larger issue. The war on drugs, disproportionately focused on black communities, and a government that was quick to punish but slow to acknowledge its role in creating the crisis. The American dream remains out of reach for many, replaced by a system that seems designed to destroy rather than uplift. To the assembled artists, including yourself, we may not be as accurate in sketching the individual jurors. Have you ever had a judge do that? You've covered a number of cases. Never had that, nor have I ever had an anonymous jury. This is very strange. They weren't scared of the judge because he was very polite and showed them a lot of respect. I think he appreciated them sitting there as jurors through this long trial. They weren't scared of the prosecutors either. They weren't on trial. They were just doing their jobs. They were at work every day. So, the only people in the courtroom to be scared of weren't the defense attorneys because they were just doing their jobs too. The only people in the courtroom to be scared of or to think all this was for had to be the defendants. Were you surprised by that? I was surprised, yeah. But there have been a lot of surprises in this case. It's been very, very unusual. Within a week, Rayful Edmund, who had been held with the rest of the defendants at the DC jail, was transferred to Quantico and flown there daily by helicopter. They put on what's colloquially known as a full court press. Every power they had, they used. Rayful's aunt, Rita Perry, helped raise him. She's in jail now too for conspiring to distribute cocaine. Prosecutors love to charge conspiracy because it gives them all sorts of legal advantages. This is a powerful statute for prosecutors. It allows them to bring in the comprehensive criminal conduct of an entire organization. You know, Rayful would come to my house at all hours of the night. He'd wake me up to cook for him, or he'd need his hair cut. All the kids had their own keys because it was a family home. One of the ways the government misuses the conspiracy law is that in a case where 2 or 3 people are charged, they can introduce evidence that only relates to one person. You are held liable for anything one of your fellow conspirators does, as if you did it yourself. They talked about giving me 20 years in jail for something I didn't do. It's wrong, and somebody out there has got to know and help us. We have thousands of people serving a lot more time than they should. It's completely irrational. What do you make of the wreckage of your family? Your daughter is now facing trial and your grandchildren are in jail. 5 grandchildren involved in this case. 6 grandchildren total. When Rayful was on trial about 2 days before I was supposed to go to court to testify for him, the FBI just showed up at my house. When your office and the U.S. Attorney's Office called 2 of the coach's players in, why did you call them in? They let me know that I wasn't in any trouble, but they wanted me to understand my situation. They told me if I testified, my basketball career was over. But if I didn't, they wouldn't bother me. I could still move on with my life. I chose to testify for Rayful. Our kids went back to playing with their neighbors. They didn't go back to playing with drug dealers, and I think we need to understand that. To make a long story short, I was a Division II All-American. I was Player of the Year. There were 2 camps I was supposed to go to, but I didn't even find out about them until they were already over. I got my invitation after the fact. My college coach knew what it was about, and so did I. Essentially, I think what happens is we try to build an intelligence base and work from that. One of the primary things we need, and we ask the community to assist us with, is providing information. We're not out there 24 hours a day. But what made you call those 2 young men in? You really need cooperators. You need people on the inside because the whole organization is illegal. Edmund has insisted that the witnesses who testified against him, his former friends and fellow drug dealers, were lying to save themselves. But there was one inadvertent witness even Edmund couldn't disavow. What about your mother? My mother? "Your mother talking about you?" I don't know if she was talking about me or who she was talking about. As a prosecutor, that has to be very, very powerful evidence. When you can show jurors a defendant sitting across the room at a table discussing drugs, that's incredibly powerful. Edmund's unsuspecting mother was recorded at a local restaurant, speaking to a friend who had agreed to wear a wire for the prosecution. Listening to Bootsy, Edmund's own mother, who was also convicted as a co-conspirator, talk about how Rayful got started in the drug business and how he became so huge in it must have been devastating. That's even more damaging than having her testify as a government witness against her own son. It was really messed up that they targeted his mother out of all people, because honestly, she had nothing to do with anything we did. But the feds thought, if we grab her and throw her into this conspiracy, we can make him give us something. But his mom stayed strong the whole time. She told him, "Stand your ground. We're going to beat this case." End of story. The jury found Edmund guilty of a massive drug conspiracy and sentenced him to life without parole. I always knew throughout the whole trial that we were going to be found guilty. The FBI got a tip from an informant that Rayful was setting up drug deals from prison at Lewisburg. He couldn't have been there for more than 2 months before we started hearing that everybody was moving dope, everybody was selling. The clever Edmund had simply moved his operations to prison. Lewisburg became his office for dealing drugs. His Colombian connection reached out to contacts grateful to Edmund and put together major drug deals from inside the prison. Imagine our frustration. We had spent all this effort, all this taxpayer money, to identify his organization, prosecute him, and lock them all up. They received huge sentences, and here he was, in prison, becoming a bigger drug dealer than when he was on the streets. We kept thinking back to something we saw a few weeks ago. Earlier this month, when Edmund was taken from the courtroom to jail for the last time, he walked confidently toward the police helicopter, turned, and mouthed these words. "Look closely," Edmund said, "I'll be back." Pathed Colombians were teaming up with the Mexicans. They knew the raw product was coming in at record levels, and they were flooding the border region with cocaine. Rayful made friends with a serious Colombian dealer. Everybody was making money in Lewisburg. He wasn't the only one. Even the people we arrested 10 years ago, who did heavy time, 5, 6, 8 years, they're back out selling again. If Ray wanted to be a rat, he would have done it when his mother was involved. His mother, the woman he loved more than life itself, constant Bootsy Bird, meant everything to him. If he was going to turn informant, he would have done it back then to protect his mother and his sister, whom he loved dearly. He would never have wanted to see them incarcerated, so something must have forced him to do what he did. Because why else would he spend 18 years in some of the most dangerous prisons in the world? It wasn't because he enjoyed it, it was because of the honor and the code he lived by. But something changed. After 17 or 18 years, he suddenly decided to cooperate? No, that didn't add up. We were all very surprised that Rayful was even open to this. I personally have no problem using snitches. You have to in order to prove cases within our legal system. He told us that he had been thinking about this for a long time. He had already made up his mind that if law enforcement approached him, he would cooperate. At one point, he even asked, "What do you want me to do?" Once he made his decision and signed the plea agreement, he committed to it fully. He understood that by doing so, his survival was now in the hands of law enforcement. We arranged for him to contact us from an undercover apartment. Instead of his friends and family making three-way calls for him, we would set up the calls ourselves. He would beep his source, the source would call back, and they would make arrangements, all through public telephones, making electronic surveillance easier. That's how we set it up. People thought they were untouchable. Nobody ever believed they would actually go to jail, not even when Ray set them up. But come on, man. How can you be mad at him? Think about it. How are you going to owe someone like Ray $30,000, then turn around and ignore him like it's nothing? When Ray calls and says, "Don't worry about that, just come and see me," you should know what's up. We arranged meetings with 6 to 8 different individuals who wanted a drug connection through Rayful. Meanwhile, in Colombia, a trafficker struck a deal to smuggle nearly 700 pounds of cocaine to Miami. I believe there were 8 separate deals, all taken down in a single day. The men he hired to transport the drugs were actually undercover U.S. customs agents who seized the entire shipment. One of the most feared drug kingpins in Colombia had finally turned himself in. I've been in this business for 25 years, and that was the largest drug seizure I'd ever seen. When I walked in and looked at it, I got chills. The sheer magnitude of it hadn't even sunk in yet. As many of you know, Jose Ali Lopez Chacon from Colombia boarded a plane bound for Miami. When he landed, he was immediately arrested. Sources say agents believe he was a close associate of Pablo Escobar, leader of the Medellin cartel. The capture of these key individuals, top leaders in Colombian drug trafficking and money laundering, was a major breakthrough. We believe they operated 2 massive drug rings in the United States. The Colombians that Rayful was dealing with, they don't play games. That's why things got serious when they found out Ray had flipped. Leslie even claimed there was a hit out on him. You don't double-cross people like that. Edmund was in involuntary protective custody due to threats against his life. In 2021, Judge Emmett G. Sullivan granted the government's request for early release, although Edmund has a separate 30-year sentence for running his operation from prison. On July 31, 2024, Edmund was transferred from prison to a halfway house at an undisclosed location in Kentucky or Tennessee, under the supervision of the Bureau of Prisons' Nashville Residential Reentry Management Office. He died at a halfway house in Miami, Florida, on December 17, 2024, from a heart attack. He was 60. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. Would you like to see a biopic on Rayful Edmund's life? Comment below. Who should play Rayful Edmund?